My name is Claire Boren. I'm a child survivor and an artist. I have created my story through my art. I'd like to start by saying to you, when I say the word home, what do you think of? In the past, students have mentioned words like comfort, family, love, warmth. I created this image to show what home meant to me. And when I ask, what do you see? People will say, cold, dangerous, uncomfortable, miserable. And that's how I conveyed what home was like for me during the period as a child in the Holocaust. 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. Out of that, 1.5 million were children. I am one of those children. Only 11% of Jewish children survived. I am part of that statistic. When I came to the United States as a young child of about 11, my first priority was to try to be like everybody else. I did not want to be the outstanding, different person. So I cut off my braids, I removed my earrings, and I tried to blend in as fast as I could. I never, without making a conscious decision, I never spoke about my past. Even as an adult, my friends have told me that I somehow gave off this aura of saying, don't ask. I did not want to talk about it. My past eventually confronted me through my art and enabled me to connect to that past. I had attended a mixed media workshop where we picked up random objects. I went to a pile of discarded pieces of sculpture. I put something together and without a plan, and when I looked at it, I realized that what it conveyed to me was an image of a public hanging that I had created. This is the image that I created. It is somewhat abstracted, but to me, I knew exactly what this was. This was the image, and I was rather surprised that I had done this. After doing this first piece, I continued to explore my past in almost a feverish manner, creating many Holocaust pieces. As I created these pieces, my past just flooded through me. And this is the story that I uncovered, and I'd like to share with you. I was born shortly before the war in the small town of Mizuch. This is a road that leads to the small town. I took these pictures when I went back to visit in the 94, 95. So I was born in the small town before the war. It was a small, pretty town, rather prosperous. They exported fruits and vegetables. I lived there in a house with my mother and father, and the other part of the house lived my aunt and uncle and 2 cousins. This is a picture of my grandmother and some of her grandchildren. One grandchild of hers, other than myself, survived. My cousin, who was much older than me, and she lived in South America and in Israel. She died recently, but I'm in touch with her daughter. My father was one of 9 siblings, and yet the only 9 siblings, they all had, 7 of them were married with children, and it was only my cousin and I that survived. This is next one. This is a picture of the family. So if you see there's a woman towards the right holding a baby in her arms, I'm the baby. And the young woman right in front of me to the right is my cousin Miriam, that she's the one who survived. She was about 10 or 15 years older than I was. This is another picture. On top right is my father, and then a sister of his. On the bottom is my grandmother and a young man next to her. The young girl on the left with the bow in her hair, that's my cousin Chava, who we shared a house with and who was murdered when we were caught in the woods. Okay, so in this picture, on the lower far right, that's my father. And next to him is one of his sisters, and I think another sister. This is the picture of my grandmother's house. The population of the town was about 2,000 people. About 40% were Jewish. The rest were Polish, Czech, and Ukrainian. There's another image of the house. This is my grandmother's house, and then our house was in the back. Sometime in 41 or 42, we were put into a ghetto. And now many families shared one house. And now my mother and father and I were in one room. This picture is my favorite picture. This is, to the right is my father, my mother, an aunt and an uncle. And then the left-hand corner, if you could see it on the ground, that's my dog Rex. There he is. That's Rex, my constant companion. Well, my memories of that time, dates and chronology are vague. Certain events are etched indelibly in my brain. A memory. I am playing with my dog in my yard, and two German soldiers come by and they take the dog. For me, this was the beginning of the war. I am standing in the window, somehow knowing that I'm not supposed to be looking out, and the image that I see is a man is hanging on the gallows in the town square with a placard across his chest. During this time, there were people escaping from other towns, and they started telling my father about the deportations, the killings, and he decided that he had to arrange for our family to go into hiding. So one day, this man came, and he told us that we had to leave that day. For whatever reason, my father wasn't ready to leave. But this man kept insisting that we should go. So my mother and I left. Another memory. I'm walking in the field with my mother and father and this man. My father lifts me up and kisses me goodbye. And that was the last time that I saw my father. I imagine now in retrospect that this man must have known that the next day was the Roundup. So the very next day, on October 13th, 1942, was the Roundup in our town. After cordoning off the Mizoch ghetto, the Germans and the local police forced all the Jews to assemble in the market square. From there, they were marched to a killing site. The killing squad shot men, women, and children, one by one. And on October 14th, 1942, the Jewish population and life that had existed for 300 years in the town of Mizoch ceased to exist. The photos of this massacre are available on the internet. There's a ditch, and the people are being shot one by one and thrown into this ditch. We stayed with this family for a short time before they told us that it was too dangerous for them and we had to leave. We were walking on the road, and then at one point I refused to walk any further. Taking a chance, my mother knocked on the door of this poor-looking farm rather than the more prosperous one next door. These people were a simple religious Christian family, and they felt somewhat of an obligation to take us in. They dug a hole in the barn under a pig. It was just about the length and width of my mother and I lying down. We were there for about 3 months. At first, my mother told me stories from books she had read and movies she had seen. But after a while, my days and nights became reversed. Without any human contact or outside stimulation, I retreated into a fantasy world. When my mother realized I had lost all touch with reality, we left. I have been thinking a great deal about that time in the hole. This is an image that I created to represent my time in the hole. I had created many images trying to convey what it was like for me, this claustrophobic, dark, horrible place. And I really had a difficult time creating any. This was one of the images I created. It is now in the permanent exhibit at Change. I actually never wanted to look at it and have it in my home. I've been thinking a great deal about this time and the hole that I talk about, the hole, this total darkness and this isolation. Because today we're asked to be, sort of isolating in our own homes, but it is so different. I still have, right now, I can come outside and go in. I have the whole house. And yet we all feel stressed and unhappy about not having any activities, not going outside, not playing games or ball or being part of a team. And I just really can't understand how I managed to survive that time, but I did. So at that point, when my mother realized that I was really totally out of it, she decided we had to leave. So we left, and we went to a village where my mother knew someone who had worked for our family. There, she let me run around with the other farm children. I spoke only Polish. I didn't look Jewish, so I was able to do that. So I was taking care of the animals. I was outside. And apparently within a short time, I came back to myself. My mother had to stay in hiding, however. In this village, they told us there were other Jewish people hiding in the nearby forests. And so my mother and I left and decided to go and find them. Nowadays, I don't understand how we managed to find this group, but we did. So we were hiding in the forest with a group of about 20 or 25 individuals. Actually, my uncle, who had shared a home with us, was there with my 2 cousins. Now, in the woods, the German regular army did not come in to hunt the Jewish people. It was the local population. The Germans did not come in because there were fighting groups in the forest called the partisans, like guerrilla groups that were armed. So they did not come in. We had no shelter. We slept right in the open. We ate berries and whatever we could forage in the woods. If it was raining, we slept in the rain. At one point, some men showed up to the group and said that they were Russians and that they wanted to take us somewhere. My mother recognized one of them and realized that he was not a Russian. And so she realized our danger, and she said to him, "If you let us go, I will go and get another group of people that are in hiding and come back." We left. And the people who had come, they were Polish or Ukrainian, I don't know. The whole group was killed other than my mother and I and 2 other people. So we left. Sometime towards the end of 43, my mother decided, since the winter was coming and we couldn't stay in the forest and we had no place to go, that she would go back to our house and dig up the money that my father had hidden in the backyard and had insisted that she see where he was hiding it. So we went back to our town. My mother left me in a shed and covered me with this heavy blanket, and she went off to dig up this money. I remembered as if it was yesterday, I was covered with this heavy blanket. There were rats scurrying around all over. And, there was the bombardment. It was the Allies were bombing this area. And it was just flashes of bombardment and horror. Every minute seemed like a year. And I remember vividly thinking that, what would I do if my mother did not come back? When my own daughter was about this age, about I think 5 years old, I looked at her and I said to myself, how does a 5-year-old think like that? But that's what happened. My whole time in hiding was actually a year and a half. When I used to think about it, I thought it was like years. It was from October of 42 into the spring of 44. When my mother dug up the money, with that she was able to pay this family. They were Czech, and they kept us in the attic. And with the money, it provided some food for them and for us. Throughout all of this period, a year and a half, what made it really, I think, possible for me to survive was the fact that I was always with my mother. I hate to think of how children must feel when they're separated from their parents. After we were liberated in that area, it was taken over by the Russians. I attended school, first grade in Russia under the Soviets. And the war was over. I remember I was in that class, and I remember running outside with my classmates, and everybody was celebrating. So since we were Polish citizens, we were allowed to leave. My mother reconnected with a man from our town of Mizuch, and eventually they married. So as Polish citizens, we were able to leave the Soviet Union. We went from there to Poland, and then we went to Germany, and we were in a displaced persons camp. And in the displaced persons camp, we belonged to different parties that were equivalent to political parties in Israel. And I belonged to this party, Beitar, and we had these uniforms, and we sang songs, and we marched, and someone said, well, you look like you're wearing like one of those brown shirts or whatever. It was sort of an empowering experience to march, and to also for us to think in terms that we were going to go to what was then called Palestine or Israel, and we were going to fight. If you've been a victim for a long time, the idea that you can put on a uniform and go fight for your country and have your own country was a very appealing concept. So this was a class. When you see the teacher in the middle, to the immediate right, that's me. I was one of the younger students because I was so young during the war, I didn't really lose much schooling. But some of the students in the class were 2-3 years older than me. So when we came to this displaced persons camp, it was in Germany, and it seemed sort of strange because here we were free, but yet this camp was sort of surrounded with with fencing and everything. It had been an airfield with the Allies, and I think that the place we lived in were the barracks. But I really had a wonderful time there because for the first time, because it was surrounded by a fence, we couldn't leave the area unless, we were going with our parents or with somebody. I had this total freedom after, spending a year and a half in hiding, after not being able to speak. When I came out of hiding, I spoke in whispers. we were greeted by some Russian soldiers, and I ran and I hid under the table, under a tablecloth, because I was so terrified of people. I spoke in whispers. For years, everybody told me that I just spoke in whispers. But here, I got a bicycle for the first time, and I was able to just run around all day, go to school, run around and be with other children. The other thing that happened in the camp was that everybody there was speaking a different language. Some came from Poland, from Hungary, Czechoslovakia, whatever. The only language I spoke was Polish. So there was no common language. So finally, the only common language there was Yiddish, which I hadn't even known. But that was a language that I learned. And I went to school and we studied. So now we were going to go to Palestine. So the school was set up all in Hebrew. So we were learning math and geography, everything in Hebrew. So here we were learning academics and the language at the same time. But somehow we managed to do that. And I really was very happy with that. This is my card. I guess you would call it an immigration card coming to the United States. It's a health card, I see. This is me coming to the United States on I think it was like one of the Navy transport ships. So this is our coming to the United States. When I came to the United States, what I remember is that when I had to do math, they say that whatever is your native language, that's the one that you give up the last when you're learning math. I had no language. I had like 5 languages. I had Polish, German, Yiddish, Hebrew, and it was very difficult. However, I was 11, I was put into the 6th grade. And as I said, I just wanted to become very quickly American. And I've been thinking about the kindness of people. My teacher in 6th grade gave up her lunch hour every day, and she would sit with me. She would bring in like 1st grade books to teach me English. And so what I've been thinking a lot about this is that even though I had experienced one of the worst horrors of our time, the cruelty and inhumanity perpetrated by the Nazis and their collaborators, all the people that stood by and didn't say anything, I also experienced the goodness in people. And I'm thinking about that farm family who took us in with no benefit to them and putting their lives in danger, or my teacher who taught me how to read. I like to focus on the goodness in people. And I think about all of the wonderful people today, the doctors and the nurses and the first responders who are putting their lives at risk to help others. And so I really would like to conclude by saying that I did not choose to be in the Holocaust, but I can choose how I live and remember the experience. The same way, we have not chosen to be hit by this horrific disease, this virus, but it's how we behave that we have the choice. We have the choice of what we do with our time in isolation. We have the choice of how we treat each other. And I just hope that all of us can choose the right way, the just way. As I've talked about the creation of my art, what I have found is that whenever I have a strong reaction to a particular event, and I create images of that event, it invariably also goes back to my past. Here are some of my pieces. So this is another image I did of home. So this is a box that I created. And this is, I called this box Little Red Riding Hood. And what I created this box was, there was an incident of a woman that was beaten and raped in Central Park, and there was a lot of publicity about it. So I created this image referring to the woman being attacked. But then I realized it also represented the image of me being in this forest with these ominous trees and buildings. Okay. Here's another image. I called this is the image that I created for 9/11. And it's hard to see, but there are mirrors, and there's this small figure. And the idea is that this person is caught like in a fun house with all these exits. I call it no exit. So the people that were caught in the towers and the upper floors, they had no exit. But also you could say the Jews caught in Europe had no exit because no country really wanted them. Here's another image. I did a series that I call the Trap series. And it was again this image of feeling somewhat trapped and having nowhere to go. But this I see is, again, the people trapped in Europe, no place to go, but also it can be a personal trap. Sometimes we are caught up in our own thoughts or feelings, and we are trapped and we don't see a way out. This is the series. I did a group of them. I sometimes feel that these are pieces, again, that I did. I sometimes feel that I would like the viewer to form their own thoughts and to come to their own ideas of what it represents for them. Some people have suggested it could be a crucifixion. It's an image, again, of suffering. This is another one that I leave it up to you to imagine. And I don't know if we had a way to communicate. Maybe you could describe your own ideas of what it is. That's the other part of that's the pair. Again, no particular ideas or thoughts. Here, okay, this one definitely refers back to my own past. It's very obvious, and you could read into it whatever you want, but it's certainly not a happy image. It's sort of being crawled up into a ball, and whether it's in the hole or in the forest or in danger, it's just like you don't want to be where you are. Same idea. This is one of my happier pieces. For whatever reason, that's the way I did it. Same. Okay. People have given me interesting ideas of what this might be. It could be anything you want it to be, but I still think in terms of there's a figure that's being protective of the smaller figure. This is a very big piece that I did. I don't have the full image of it. It's actually 15 feet across, and I did it for a wall in the gallery. And the way I thought about it was sort of life cycles. So there is birth and childhood, adolescence, middle age, and a later time in life. So the way I like to work is sort of allowing my feelings to come through without giving it a lot of thought, without really thinking or planning, but just letting go and having the freedom to just express. When I work with students, I always like to ask, how do you deal when you're upset about something? What do you do? Or what do you do to cope with a difficult situation? And I'm always really, it's always nice for me to hear students describe what they do. Many students will say, you know, if I'm upset, I go running, or I play music, or I write in my journal, or, you know, any number of creative ideas. I just would like to leave you with this idea of being locked in the house or not being able to socialize as much or whatever. Just create your own way of coping and just being and appreciating the moment and just being okay with it. Thank you very much.